Hello everybody. This is Mike Piccirillo. I am the Executive Director of CASDA and I want to welcome you to today's webinar, which is about self-care and specifically self-care in today's COVID-19 crisis. So on the screen, I have a quote that I often refer to and have through the years because it's inspiring and helps me to refocus and to reset my thinking. And the key piece to this quote really is that we are all going to face these impossible situations or seemingly impossible situations. And certainly I think we're all feeling that way today, right now. But how do we turn these seemingly impossible situations into opportunities? And what's the opportunity that we can find, within this difficult time and challenging time that we're living in? People who practice self-care are people who are not only wise, but also show an inner strength because they understand that ultimately, if you don't take care of yourself, you're really not going to be at your best to take care of the people that you're responsible to take care of, your own family, and as teachers and educators, the children and families that we work with every single day. So to emphasize that point, I have a slide on the screen that shows you what you would see, and you have probably seen when you've flown on airplanes. You've been told by the flight attendant to take a look at the safety manual, and usually the flight attendant will tell you that if you look in the safety manual, that in the unlikely event of an emergency, that an oxygen mask will fall down out of the ceiling compartment and that you're supposed to put that mask on. And the key thing is, and they emphasize, is that you need to put your mask on first. Why? Because if you're not taking care of yourself as the adult in this situation, especially if you're traveling with children, or as an adult who maybe is, physically able, and you're with an adult, an elderly parent, et cetera, who's not, that ultimately, if you don't take care of yourself, you're not going to be able to take care of them, and you jeopardize both of your safety. So it's really important to take care of yourself. It's important to emotionally and physically care for yourself. So I want to thank you for joining us. We have quite a few participants here for this webinar, and I want to take a moment to introduce our speaker today. Our facilitator is Brian Farr, who's a friend and a colleague and a faculty member at CASDA. Before I do so, if you would like to communicate with us during the webinar, please make sure that you use the chat box. And if you ask any questions during that time of us, we'll try to answer them as we can in real time. But any questions that we don't get to during the webinar, we will ultimately answer via email after the webinar is over. So I hope you enjoy the facilitation that's going to be done by Brian Farr. And I will be on later with a little bit of information that I think you'll find important to you, some resources and also some further programming that CAS is going to be doing in the near future. Thank you and enjoy the webinar. And now to Brian Farr.
One of the things I have heard and that I have tried to live as a person in recovery is focusing on the solution rather than the problems. So it is often easy to figure out what the problem is, but what is our solution to it? I like Mike's initial quote about looking at things as opportunities, or we like to say it's life on life's terms, just dealing with what is in front of you. And in the spirit of that, I want to show you this prayer. This is a cornerstone of the recovery program. And it really is about recognizing the things that you can change, which is usually yourself, just to do the reveal there. The things that you cannot change, which is anyone else or a lot of the circumstances that are around you. Having the courage to make those changes about yourself, or at least to change your response in situations and people that you cannot change, and also the wisdom to know the difference. I think asking yourself, those of you who are parents know, we say often, do I want to fight this battle? Is this the hill I want to die on over, you know, the cell phone, or who's going to eat the last cookie? Having the wisdom to know the difference between what you can change, what you can't change, and how to respond in situations is a real cornerstone of stress management, most of the techniques I've seen. So we're going to get back to the serenity prayer. But what I'm going to ask you to do as we move forward on your pad of paper is to think for a few minutes about the numbers 1 through 5. Just reflect on them, and before we get to the end of the presentation, choose your favorite number, 1 through 5. Which one calls out to you the most today? You thinking about that? Write it down on your pad of paper, and we'll come back to that near the end. The next thing I'd like to do is have you do something that's going to really trigger your brain chemicals and help to de-stress you. Hopefully, you're in a place where the dogs aren't barking and the kids aren't pulling at your shoes and socks and pants right now. This is a breathing exercise, and it's one you can use in your classroom, you can use with your own children, and first and foremost, you can use it with yourself. It's called the 4 square. So wherever you are, I would just ask you to sit comfortably, and whatever that means to you. And the only requirement is that you have both feet on the ground. You'll see why in a minute. And once you get comfortable, I'm going to ask you to just breathe in and hold, then breathe out and hold. Breathe in and hold, and breathe out and hold. And if it's comfortable for you, you can close your eyes, continue breathing in and holding, and out and holding. And as you're breathing in and holding and breathing out, I want you to start to scan from the top of your head, going down through your brain, looking for any areas of tension, anything you're holding on to, any kind of aches or pains. And as you take that next breath in, imagine it's cool, crisp, clean air, almost like pure cold water. And it's filling in those places. And on your exhale, you're letting go of that stress. It's almost like a reddish colored breath that just has all the stress, any pains or aches in it that you're breathing out. And breathe in the cool, crisp air. Hold. And then breathe out that tension, pain, and stress on the exhale. And as you're breathing, go down into your neck and your shoulders, looking for any pain or tension, letting it go on the exhale. Then going down into your arms, into your wrists and your fingers, releasing any tension or pain on the exhale. And then go down through your chest. This is where we hold on to a lot of tension sometimes. Looking for any pain, any stress, any tightness, and just letting that go on the exhale, filling it in on the inhale. And then scan down through your legs, through your knees, your lower legs, and into your feet. Wiggle your toes around, If you have shoes on, notice that you can feel your shoes around your foot. If you don't have shoes on, notice that you can feel the floor. Is there carpet? Is there wood underneath your feet? And with your next few breaths, try to let go of all the worries about tomorrow, anything you're holding on to from yesterday. Just make yourself fully present here in this moment. Take a few more breaths and then come back to the room. Okay, so that, and I see someone is asking here, I can certainly send the attachment later. Yeah, we can do that. All right, so I can send these notes, sure. You'll have access to those, the PowerPoint. What we just did was two things. The breathing is called the 4 square, and that scan is really to ground yourself. So right now especially, we are getting a lot of information about worry and panic and what's going to happen in the future, right? And some people are worried about the past. More than ever, it's really important to try the best you can to stay present. And that is what that grounding exercise is about. It only takes a few minutes. You can start your classes with it. At college, I often will start classes with that with my students. And we'll get to some of the brain chemistry that helps with in a minute. So this next slide is a basic therapy tool. It's something I've used for years. And it's that question about how are you feeling? We're in a place where feelings that we use, or words we use to describe our feelings, can't really, they aren't really accurate. They aren't really feelings. And a good test for that is if you say the word that after you say feel, you're not really saying a feeling, right? So if I say, I feel that you shouldn't speak to me like that, well, that's not a feeling. That's just an opinion. I feel sad, or I feel guilty, or I feel frightened when you speak to me like that, is getting more to this place of feelings. This is something I think, again, everything I'm showing you here, you can teach to your students, but if we practice this in our daily lives, it's going to have much more of an impact. Getting back to that place of feelings and understanding that people's feelings are different, which we'll come back to as well. So this word stress, in our day-long conference, we would take a long time and have you kind of talk about what stress feels like to you and how that shows up for you. But in general, we know the data is in that stress really affects your body. All systems are affected negatively by stress. And the definition that I like the most for this is a specific response by the body to a stimulus. And really, we could use other words for stress. I think stress is too generalized. Is it fear? Is it pain? Are you overwhelmed? And it's disturbing or interfering with your normal physiological equilibrium. Our bodies want to be in balance. They are beautiful, wonderful machines that want to be in homeostasis at all times. And stress, times of stress, can throw us off that. So physical, mental, or emotional strain or tension as well. Pretty good definition of stress. I would encourage you when you say you're stressed to go deeper though. Get that feelings chart out and say, well, what do I mean when I say stressed? What is it that I am really feeling underneath that? I was thinking as I put this next chart up that Mike and I often show this, and the point of it is to show that not all stress is caused by negative experiences. So you'll see the number 1 they have up here is death of a spouse. I think that makes sense. Divorce, absolutely. But if we go down a little bit further, you'll see number 7 is marriage. Right? Well, what do you mean, marriage? And then marital reconciliation. There's another one. Pregnancy, gain of a new family member. I think it's really important to remember that some stress comes along when we are out of our comfort zones, when we are going into the unknown, as we are now. But in those times, through the stress, if we deal with it in ways that are healthy, we can learn a great deal, and we certainly can become a lot stronger. There is a YouTube video. This is a great time to plug into YouTube and TED Talks, that is called Making Stress Your Friend. And I think she explains it in a much better way. But the other thing that I'll have to talk to Mike about after this is adding a pandemic virus to most stressful events in one chart, because we're there now. So now I want to get into what's happening inside of your brain. So the brain is just an amazing organ to me. It's the last organ in our body to grow to its full potential. It is not fully formed until the age of 23 to 25 on average. So it's the last organ in the body to mature. And we don't know a lot of things about the brain. I treat addiction primarily, and I teach about addiction, and so much is unknown about addiction, but the American Medical Association now terms addiction, they actually say substance abuse disorders, as a brain disorder. And we know that primarily what it affects are these natural brain chemicals. We also know that in times of stress, what we would call stress, good or bad, our brain chemicals get out of balance or homeostasis, so we're not running in ways that we would when the stress was lower. That breathing exercise that we just did hit all 4 of these chemicals on that slide: dopamine, serotonin, your endorphins, and oxytocin. So when I teach about addiction, especially to young people, I always mention that chemicals, Budweiser or marijuana or that vape you're using, isn't adding any new chemicals to your brain. All it's doing is manipulating things that are already there. And in this time, what we want to do is find natural ways to increase these natural chemicals that are chemicals that will naturally calm you and help you not to feel overwhelmed or stressed or sad or fearful. And we'll get to some of that. So this is just a very simple explanation of what some of those chemicals do. Dopamine is primary. Dopamine says that tastes or feels or smells really good. Do it again. Serotonin, you've probably seen this in some of the antidepressants out there. Many of those work on serotonin in one way or another. This is just that feeling of well-being or pleasure, relaxation, contentment. Serotonin is released when you get into that deep, deep sleep. And then the one that we go for when America runs on Dunkin' and grabs their coffee is norepinephrine. So this is more of that fight or flight or arousal. This is what helps people to focus. This, in too much abundance, is one of the reasons that people might struggle with anxiety. And in times of stress, I think it makes sense to you that norepinephrine fires off more, serotonin and dopamine fire off less. So here is a question I like to ask to my students, and you can ask yours too. I love Tigger. I love Eeyore. I was down with Winnie the Pooh way before he became a big thing, because I grew up with him. But Tigger and Eeyore are wired very differently, right? When we look at their brain chemistry, you're going to see Eeyore kind of on one end of the spectrum and Tigger on the other. And I see someone recognizing that they're a Tigger. So another way to do this is to ask yourself each day, what is my mood today? When we start to take responsibility for our own moods and not saying, well, if you had my job, well, if you had my kids, well, if you had my significant other, of course you would be fill in the blank, angry, depressed, sad. When we start to say, I feel this way, my mood is this today, we are taking more responsibility for where we're at. And this, again, is a good question to ask your students, your children. Oftentimes we take responsibility for how other people feel. Now we're getting into some codependency. And so not only do we have to take care of ourselves, I also have to make all of these people in front of me feel happy all the time or serene. We're setting ourselves up for failure. So I like to ask my students, I certainly do this with my patients, where are you at today? And the key to this is remembering where someone else's mood is today just helps you to treat them in some kind of way. But we don't do this to take responsibility for somebody else's mood. Remember the serenity prayer. And remember to pick your numbers, 1 through 5. Okay, so this quote I like because it's old, honest Abe talking about most people are about as happy as they decide to be happy. And we know now that Abraham Lincoln suffered with severe, severe bouts of depression, way before depression was being diagnosed, certainly before there was proper treatment for it. Not only did he have personal depression, but I think it's fair to say he led the country through one of the darkest, if not darkest, times that we've had of the Civil War, and it was totally divided. But he was able to kind of tell himself, I am responsible for my moods. For some people, and I'm finding this very true in the addiction field now, naturally they don't produce as much serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine as others. So really, when we talk about someone's mood, I'm seeing people saying, I'm a Tigger, I'm an Eeyore, we've got some rabbits in there. We'll talk about Pooh later. He's kind of right in the middle there. But what you're really saying is, this is my temperament. Much of this stuff, again, for those of you that are parents, you'll just notice you can raise 2 kids in entirely the same household. I know I did, and their temperaments still are quite differently. I do believe at the core of this is a lot of this brain chemistry I'm talking about. So antidepressants, anti-anxiety, medications in general do work. They are not addictive substances, they are medications. There's a variety of reasons for that. One of the easiest ones to say is that tolerance does not build as quickly for antidepressants or anti-anxiety medications, where with addictive substances, it won't be long until someone is chasing after whatever effect that substance was doing on their brain. So I mention this because right now, at this time of change and going into the unknown, of course we're feeling stressed, we may be depressed, many, many anxious people out there. But if this is something that keeps up over 4 to 6 months, it may be time to talk to a doctor about some kind of medication, not just for you, but for your students as well. And then we have some just ways to kind of know, is this something that has to do with my brain chemistry? All of these things really are related to dopamine deficiencies. So trouble waking up in the morning, impulsiveness, depressed, bored, or apathetic. And again, you may have these things that happen because of a situational thing that's going on. But if we're talking about it happening over months, now you may be looking at something that is more physiological. And serotonin. We hear more about serotonin than dopamine, I believe. And these are all simple, natural ways to boost your serotonin. With vegetables, eating any kind of nuts, bananas, they have all kinds of different things. And walking, simple exercise, which you can do while staying socially conscious now. And here are a few more. It is true that positive thinking, they don't have laughter on here, but serotonin, dopamine are released with laughter. Light exposure, vitamin D3 is a big thing that we know helps with serotonin as well. I mentioned exercise. It can be a very light exercise. And it makes sense that diet, a healthy diet, really helps to boost serotonin as well. Okay, so I thought you would get a kick out of this. People sometimes will be very adverse to taking medications, but they have no problem taking a drink or taking a pill. I've met with probably thousands at this point of clients, patients through the years who have this type of thinking. And our society has bought into this for a long, long time. So if you look at some of these older ads, they contain cocaine, they contained heroin at one point. Have we really changed that much? Well, in terms of what we say is legal and what is not legal, we have, but we still have this idea that some kind of magic potion or pill or substance will do something for us that we couldn't do naturally. And I think that's an American thing. I think a lot of these have to do with making money. And we need to start questioning that. So what's happening with any addictive substance? I won't spend too much time here, but it is just increasing or decreasing the natural production and transmission of those transmitters we talked about before. In here, we're talking about dopamine because dopamine is released with every addictive substance out there. It says, hey, this feels good, and then it says, do it again. So there is a reinforcement with dopamine. And one of the strongest dopamine hijackers, besides heroin, is nicotine. So if you're wondering why these young people, we finally got them smoking cigarettes or to stop smoking cigarettes, and then vapes came out, and how could they not get that these vapes are so unhealthy for them? Nicotine is very, very strong hijacker of dopamine, and the reinforcement comes very strong. So here's our new message, even though I see some of you putting those ads on and saying, how could we? But the new ads I see, especially among women, is that wine is not only okay, it's really socially acceptable and pushed in a lot of circumstances, that somehow wine isn't really a drug, it's not even really alcohol. This came out in 2018. I was very happy about it. So any of the studies you see, whether it's wine or vodka or beer, that say, no, a little bit is good for you is really hogwash. What they're talking about is the serotonin, effects on serotonin, that you would get from a 5 to 10 minute walk or a 5 to 10 minute deep breathing, as we did before. And I know people may say, well, wait, what about this or what about that? Always and forever, the negative effects of alcohol as a toxin will outweigh any beneficial effects that it has for you. And I thought you would appreciate this too. So here's the mixed message that we get. Even though we know this and no amount of alcohol is good, the liquor stores were deemed an essential business during this coronavirus. So if we think there's a mixed message about some of these substances, caffeine, alcohol, marijuana is going to be legal soon, think about the messages that our young people are getting and how they kind of work through this and the hypocrisy of some of the adults around them about what is a drug and what is addictive. And to get back to stress management, right now, I would not recommend that anyone starts drinking more, that you are socially isolated and quarantined. That thing that starts off as a habit, I'm just having one or two, it's helping me to turn off the news, I'm really, it helps me just to relax. I will always suggest that you find healthier ways to relax and trigger those brain chemicals. So natural highs are what I'm all about. And there is a big long list of them here. This is something that I like to show to younger people as well. Because things like, I know one of the things I've enjoyed at home, my daughter's home from college now, my son is home from high school, is breaking out the board games or just they've made videos of us because they are those drama kids, but just having that time together and interacting. Laughter. thank goodness we have the technology that we have now, because we can still stay connected, as was said recently, you know, stay connected spiritually or stay connected with people by talking. We're able to do that. And these things are all going to help you to boost your mood. Isolation is not a good human condition. Every addiction out there I have seen has involved some type of isolation by the person getting to the point where it's them and the drug or addictive behavior. So staying connected is really, really important. Okay. So here are some of the resources that I will suggest for you and for your students. This first one is mostly for you though, unless you teach high school, or maybe some older students might be interested in this. The secret wasn't really a secret. Most of the things that I talk about as an educator and a counselor are ideas I have seen over and over again. They're packaged a little bit different. They are taught a little bit different, but they all say the same thing. And that's not a criticism. I think when I see something being used again and again, I go, there's got to be a reason for that. It must work. So what The Secret talked about was your thoughts become things. So as you think, so shall you act. One of the techniques of counseling I use all the time is called cognitive behavioral therapy. And it is exactly what this secret is talking about. If I don't interrupt my thoughts and say, oh, it's awful, it snowed outside, I can't believe that I'm home, this is going to be awful. If I don't interrupt that thought, I am going to create a self-fulfilling prophecy in my life. And rather than saying, at least let me just play this out and see how it goes. I'm not saying that you have to go into everything saying, this will be wonderful and this is great, or, you know, being in a state of denial. But sometimes we worry about things, or we tell a story that does not really exist or come true. And oftentimes we tend to do that to the negative much more than we do to the positive, that things will work out. And then the same with the second line here, that wherever the focus goes, that thing grows. Same kind of idea. What are you focusing on? The problem or the solution, as we started off before. So The Secret goes even farther. It talks about making things like vision boards. Put the things right in front of you that you want. This is something that I think is a great idea for your students. I have my patients who are living in halfway houses or homeless shelters do this all the time. Let's get some magazines out, put photos up, put the things that you want as you start to get sober and in recovery. So right now, when you're home and you have some time, what are those things you might want for yourself? What are those things you've been putting off about your own growth? Or it could just be something as simple as doing a puzzle, something that is helpful for you to get done. Okay, this is one of my favorite character education books. It's everywhere now. It started off for adults, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. And then his son, Sean, kind of took over the business. And I know some schools use this all the time. But this is something that I have tried to practice and live since I was introduced to it when I was actually going to school to get my degree in education. This was one of our required texts. And all of these 7 habits really are useful because you can teach them to your students or your children while you are using them yourself. And the first one, since we don't have the time to go through all of them, the first one is really the cornerstone of what we're saying today. Are you responding to these changes, to being in the unknown right now, or are you reacting? Are you looking at what you can control, or are you just saying it's out of my control? Okay. Another way of saying this is to remember your choice, which is right here in the middle. The stimulus, if we go back to the serenity prayer, is the thing which you cannot control. The weather, what your in-laws say or do when they come for that visit you've been putting off for so long. the person in front of you who just cut you off in traffic, or they're right on your bumper even though you're doing 70 on the Northway. You cannot control the stimulus, right? And if you react, you are not taking any of this time in the middle where you have the freedom to choose. After 2 decades of dealing with anger, one of the groups I love running at the clinic is anger management. Angry people react. They do not know how to respond. They have very short fuses, and they really are giving over their power because it's so habitual for them to react. I'm sure that you see this in children too. They've normally learned it from the adults in their life. So what we want to learn, and we want to learn by doing it, is to take a breath after that stimulus gets to you. After the thing has happened, take a breath, step back, and think before you respond. That really is one of the most important things that comes out of the 7 habits. So he has some examples of proactive versus reactive language. And you can see it's really about taking your power. Empowering is a huge part of any self-help program or counseling. So all of those reactive things, I have given over power to the stimulus. Nothing I can do, just the way I am. I was born Irish, so of course I'm an alcoholic, right? I am Irish, by the way. He makes me so mad. All of those things have to do with the stimulus. On the proactive side, it's about you looking at what you can control. If we go back to the serenity prayer. And your responses, you can always control. This is a great movie. If you haven't seen it yet, it is called Happy, the movie, the movement. It goes around the world and interviews happy people. No time like the present to check out this movie. You can show it to your students too, or your kids. This is a great thing to watch together. And I won't give away, I won't do too much of the reveal, but I'll tell you right off the bat, the #1 thing that makes people happy is not related to money or income. It's related to other things. So that's a great resource. Another good book, and I have some of these behind me, as you can see, they're all little books, so they won't take a whole lot of time, is The 4 Agreements. This is a character education program you can certainly roll out to your classrooms and to your families, but first of all, to yourself. #2 is the one that has always spoken to me the most, as I mentioned it earlier in the presentation. Nobody else's feelings are really my responsibility, you know? So don't take anything personally. Is really about you recognizing what you can control and what you can't control. #1, be impeccable with your word, is about not giving in to too much to rumors. Maybe you had a relative like mine who said, if you haven't got something nice to say to somebody, don't say anything at all. I heard that in the Bambi movie too from years ago. Not making assumptions is about speaking up. We assume things all the time and then we just keep our mouths shut and don't ask for what we need. And #4 is for you perfectionists out there. So this is not that you have to do 110% 8 days a week. And I know many helpers and teachers are perfectionists. This is about going back to that feeling chart. And if you say, today I'm feeling off, allow yourself the 70% day. Let the people around you know it has nothing to do with them, but allow yourself not to run at 100% all the time. That's how we burn out. And when I say we, teachers and helpers are one and the same. I mean, we are doing the same work. So again, any of these resources I'm mentioning at this point, you can go on and check out YouTube's, TED Talks, or if you're a reader, you can check out these books. Mindfulness is a term that's getting a lot of traction these days. We certainly use it in therapy. I think it's a new term to describe an old thing we've been doing for a long time though. And it really involves being aware, having acceptance, and the third one, really, really key right now, staying present. We just don't know what we don't know, but we can't control tomorrow, right? And we can't control yesterday. So we need to stay present, and we need to do the very best we can with the people who matter most in our lives in this present moment. So the language we use, the way we think, and having awareness of all those things really goes along with responding rather than reacting. And you can Google, mindfulness. What's it about? You can go on and get all kinds of different resources. I thought this was just a different way of saying it. I go back to Mike's first slide that he opened with about what's going on right now is happening. We can label it good, we can label it bad, it's happening. So what are we going to do given these circumstances? This is the way the cards were dealt. These are things you can do. Again, if you're saying, well, this sounds great, and it's all progress, not perfection. You're never going to get to a point where I think you can do all 7 all the time, every day, but we can go back and recognize when we haven't done so well and ask for forgiveness and make amends. All right, so back to Pooh. I'm just being mindful of my time here too. So I had said I was going to get back to Winnie the Pooh because I've been down with him for a long time. This is a great book, and you can go on and get some explanations of this too. But the Tao of Pooh is really taking Buddhist philosophy, which is cool, but can be rather complicated, and putting it into the Winnie the Pooh story. And I saw you all kind of labeling yourselves before in the comments, but this is a great book. If you've read it before, as I'm seeing, read it again. There's always something new in there. And one of the messages that I got from it is don't underestimate the value of doing nothing, which is really what we're asked to be doing right now. Slow down. Yes, things will get done, but we need to remember that the weight of the world is not on our shoulders. If we could have our way, we probably would control or try to control everything, but that is not really effective. All right, I put these in here too. As a person in recovery, I am not someone who, I still do attend 12-step meetings. I wouldn't say it's been the cornerstone of my recovery. I've tried a lot of different things, but the first step is really one that is important. And I've heard people even say, these 12 steps are just a way of living, which is true. So the first step of the 12 steps of recovery is to admit you are powerless over alcohol, that your lives have become unmanageable. Back to the serenity prayer. I am powerless over many things. So now I ask myself, with plugging in the steps, is this something I can control, or is this something I don't have control over? And if it is something I can control, how important is it in the grand scheme and my values and where I want to be? So regardless of if you are somebody in recovery or not, I think checking out the 12 steps and how they work in people's lives is another good kind of way. And some of these slogans we use, I hear people say, people not in recovery all the time. The one that I'm hearing all the time, and I'm looking to see, oh, there it is, one day at a time, right? One day at a time is really all we have. We can make all kinds of plans. We can have all kinds of goals, and I think that's wonderful, but we also need to be flexible. And I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here, because if anyone is flexible, it's teachers. You go in with a plan of what your day is going to look like. You don't sit in cubicles in front of computers all day. And this is a time to be flexible, but really slow yourself down to that one day at a time. Okay, another good book or thing that you can check on YouTube is The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. I believe I've got his name right there. Really interesting stuff about being present, not getting too far away from yourself. If you're an animal lover like me, I just look to my dogs. Boy, do they know how to live in the present. So excited when I come home, so excited when it's dinner time, not a care in the world. And we can learn a lot from animals and nature and being present in the now. So that's a good resource for that. Here is another app you can get because apps are everywhere. It's called Headspace. The one that I have is free. You can find others. These are only a minute or two. That's all I can usually do. Start your day off with them, end your day with them. When your classrooms get up and going, you can play one of these through. All kinds of different meditations you can have on various subjects, but this is important time to give to yourself. And it's time to take your numbers out. So those numbers you had, 1 through 5, take a look at them. If you got number 1, that means that you should focus on God or higher power. So whatever that means to you, try to put some focus on God or higher power. If you pick number 2, that is on serenity. So you are directed to look at serenity. What does that mean? How can you find it? If you got number 3, acceptance. What does acceptance mean to you? What situation is in your life right now that requires some acceptance? Number 4 is about courage. It takes courage, and where might you need to plug some courage in at this point? And then number 5 is about wisdom, finding wisdom. And as I mentioned, I throw this out there. This is a prayer that goes way back. It really is meant to be non-secular. In recovery, we use higher power a lot. I'm not pushing anybody toward any kind of religious belief. But in terms of spirituality, I think the best term that I have heard for spirituality is connection. You know, having connection with others. And that's why I do mention it and bring these things up. Because right now, especially, feeling isolated or away can be really difficult. All right. So I'm going to ask you to write down 2 things. What is one thing, or maybe you have more, you will do in the next week to decrease your stress level and to kind of bring you to that place of serenity? So write down one thing or more you will do. Now this needs to be for yourself. It's not for the kids. It's not for anybody else but you. This is something you'll do for yourself. It can be reading the book. It can be doing meditation. And then what are 3 things that you will do in the next month for the same reasons? These are for yourself. This is your oxygen mask that you're going to put on. And whenever, this goes back to the 7 habits, something you can do when your classes start, but for yourself, rather than just telling yourself up here, I'm going to do it, to write it down is really important because then it becomes more of a goal. And put it on a sticky and put it right in front of you someplace where you'll see it every day. That goes to the secret. And my last slide, then I'm going to turn things back over to Mike to wrap us up, is Mr. Rogers. There's been so much talk about Mr. Rogers lately. One of the funny anecdotes I have is a very angry man, one of the angriest patients I've ever had, referring to me as Mr. Rogers one time. How I just didn't understand him, and I had this Mr. Rogers life, and I thought it was hysterical, and I see it as a compliment. So this quote really is about Mr. Rogers saying there are scary things out there and looking for people who are helping. You are helpers, you are teachers, you are family members. I'm hoping that you are able to look for people to help you during this time too. Sometimes those who give help the most need a lot of help at receiving it from others. So I'm going to turn it back over to Mike to kind of wrap things up, and thank you all for the time.
Well, thanks everybody for joining us, and thank you, Brian, for leading us through this self-care workshop today.
We really appreciate it. We hope that this was helpful for you. What I put up on the screen is we have a long-term partnership with the University of Albany School of Education. We've been partnered with the university for 70 years, and the School of Education staff, professors, and administration have put together a really nice website that's called Remote Educational Resource Center that has a plethora of resources available for educators. And you should definitely go to this site. It definitely will be helpful to you. Also of note is that CASDA will be offering a second webinar next Tuesday, March 31st from 4 to 5 called Designing Distance Learning to Support ELLs. And that's with Kurt Hassenflug, who's a teacher in the North Colony School District. And that will be one, hopefully, of many different webinars that we're going to offer over the next few weeks. So be looking out for our marketing materials and also our newsletter that's coming out on Thursday. That will also have some good information in it. Until the next time we have an opportunity to engage with you, please take care of yourself, take care of your families. Thank you for the support that you provide the children that you educate, and please be well and be safe. Thank you and take care.